We all know what that chime means. The 2025 NFL Draft is here. It is draft week, and today we're going to be ranking the top 10 NFL draft prospects for this year's NFL Draft. Essentially kind of a big board for top 10 prospects with a few honorable mentions that will be talked about beforehand. And I think that this is really a talented draft. Maybe not the most generational heavy draft, even though in my board, I think I have 3, maybe even 4 blue chip prospects that I have ranked, which I'll elaborate more on later in the video. I think that this draft has a lot of players that can impact the roster now. And these 10 that I'll dive deep on in this video in terms of a breakdown standpoint can impact rosters from day one and training camp and into the 2025 season and into the future. A lot of the conversation through this draft process is that after the blue chip players that for example, from 5 to 30 range, there's not a big gap in terms of the players that will be added onto a roster for this upcoming NFL season. And that's very true. And before getting into an overall view of the draft class standpoint in terms of later rounds and things of that nature, from a first round standpoint, I can see that there's a lot of good positions that will be taken in the first round, whether it's from edge. Obviously at the top you have people like Abdul Carter, but even throughout the first round, people have players mocked like a Jalen Walker, a Mike Green, a Shamar Stewart, Michael Williams, G.I. Campbell, Walter Nolan, even a James Pierce Jr. too. There's a lot of different positions that could be taken from a defensive standpoint and edge rushing standpoint, which is intriguing. I think one position that's getting too much hate or not enough attention in my opinion is a wide receiver class, specifically in the first round. And while not all of these prospects will be on my top 10 or big board, I do think that in the first round and even in the second round to an extent, there's going to be some underrated gems from the wide receiver position that end up making an impact on some rosters this upcoming season. Whether in the first round you have players like a Ted McMillan, who I think has received too much hate and overthinking, or Matthew Golden, who has really shot up a lot of people's draft boards after his 40-yard dash time of a 4.29 at the draft combine. A player like Emeka Egbuka, who was, yes, at times a wide receiver too at Ohio State, but thrived in his role well, and I think he has a high floor. Being behind players like a Marvin Harrison Jr. or Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State, Emeka Egbuka is a wide receiver who's also talented, along with a Luther Burden, who some people have mocked in the second round, which is wild to me. So with that said, I think that this draft has a lot of talent at various positions, and the running back class is very deep. You can make the argument that there are nearly 30 draftable running backs in this year's draft, with of course Ashton Jeanty being in the forefront of that, the type of year that he had, being a Heisman runner-up, nearly breaking Barry Sanders' record. But also with him, Marion Hampton has really shot up a lot of people's draft boards, and he could be a first round pick. And then even in the second round, I think there's going to be a lot of running backs we see get taken there. Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson. The list really goes on with the running backs, because I think there's going to be a lot of players who can impact immediately, because as we know, there's been a revitalization of the running back position in the NFL, whether it's a Saquon Barkley, the impact that he had with the Eagles, or Derrick Henry, despite being 31 years old, what he did last year, and a Josh Jacobs to an extent as well. We're seeing a renaissance of the running back position. I think that how currently the NFL is being oriented in terms of a run game, a lot of people getting back into that, playing a physical style of football, that bodes well for teams not only looking for, the running back position, but also these edges and stuff like that, defensive tackles as well too. This is a deep defensive tackle draft. I mentioned Walter Nolan, but also of course Mason Graham, who we'll talk about, who is arguably the best defensive player in this draft. I said arguably, and we'll talk about that later, but it's also a deep defensive tackle draft too as well, because you have people in the second, third round, or even fourth round who can make impacts in terms of a defensive tackle standpoint, whether a 3 technique or a 1 tech. So I think that provides a lot of versatility for this draft. There's a lot of players and prospects who could make an impact day one. A lot of people have the conversation of this year's quarterback class being a little bit weaker, and there's always that quarterback tax. I do believe a player like a Cam Ward will go first overall, and I think that he's a really good prospect, but also a player who won't be on this list even as an honorable mention, I'm not gonna lie, Shedeur Sanders. I will say this, a lot of people are overthinking him as well. I think that a situation like Pittsburgh will be great for him, and with these other quarterbacks, I'm not gonna lie, like a Jackson Dart, a Tyler Shough, a Jalen Milroe, I do not think those 3 are first round quarterbacks, but I think certainly Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders should be. So I'm not really gonna elaborate too much on that perspective, because like I said, I don't really have too many first round grades on these quarterbacks besides Cam Ward and Shedeur, but I think that they're overthinking that aspect of it. But this year's draft class, while it isn't like last year's class in terms of seeing 5 quarterbacks go in the first round, whether it's Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Michael Penix Jr., JJ McCarthy, and Bo Nix, seeing 6 quarterbacks go in the first round, I still think it's a better draft class from a quarterback standpoint than 2022, when we saw a player like Kenny Pickett get picked by the Steelers. You still have Cam Ward, who I think will be a really good quarterback at the next level, and same with Shedeur Sanders. But before I get too in depth with this video though, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. We post about here videos about the NBA, NFL, Marvel, DC, pop culture. Of course, this is the NBA playoffs, so if you look at my channel, there's been a lot of NBA content as well too. Check out that if you love basketball and NBA. But also there will be more draft and NFL oriented stuff coming here on the channel. We have this video ranking the top 10 prospects. We're also going to recap the draft, talk about the biggest takeaways from this year's NFL draft. And if you have been subscribed to my channel throughout the season, or if you're new to this channel, you know that I post weekly recaps from the NFL season, and also throughout the summer I'll be posting previews from different players, teams, and things of that nature too, talking talking about the biggest storyline. Y'all stay tuned for that. So with that being said though, guys, let's talk about these top 10 NFL draft prospects ranked. But before we get into the top 10, let's talk about the honorable mentions that I have on this list. So the first honorable mention that I have is Georgia Bulldogs edge Jalon Walker. Some people have him listed as linebacker as well, but I think in the NFL he'll probably be an edge rusher. I've seen some mock drafts have him potentially going as high as 8 to the Carolina Panthers, and I can certainly see that. While his stats aren't necessarily the most eye-popping, he had 6.5 sacks in 2024, 5 in 2025, and of course his freshman season only had 1. He did have 61 tackles last year, and if you just look at his tape, he just wins. It's really that simple. The one thing that probably will be a concern to a lot of people is his ability to stop the run and things of that nature, and if they want to put him at an off-ball linebacker position, if he'll thrive there, if they want to just truly line him up at the edge to move around and attack the right or left tackle. That's an interesting component. But the reason why he's not in my top 10 like a lot of different draft experts and people who have analyzed their mock drafts of him being in the top 10 is that I just think if I'm a GM or a coach at the next level, he's a prospect that I'm okay passing on because there's some other versatile defenders in this draft who I might be enamored with. Like if I'm Carolina or something like that, which I know he's mocked there into some mock drafts, I might be okay with trading back a little bit and drafting a player like a Mike Green, or depending on what I need, a Michael Williams, a player of that nature. So with Jalon Walker, I think that he certainly will be really good at the next level, but I still wouldn't rank him on in my top 10 yet, but he definitely is close. My second would have to be Jahdae Barron, cornerback from the University of Texas, 5'11", 200 pounds. I know he's not a bigger corner, but I think he's very versatile and he moves around a lot, and I think that he's a very underrated prospect in my opinion. He's probably a player that'll get drafted in the later teens area, but I think that he'll be able to impact a roster immediately. His size may be something that teams concern and why he might be sliding a little bit, but if you look at his production, especially last year with UT and the run that he went on, he had a really good season, had those 5 interceptions, 46 solo tackles, also had a sack too as well. I think that Jahdae Barron, particularly in his combine and overall just looking at his tape from the college football playoffs, I think that he has really been able to, at least in the evaluation stage from these different teams, diving in on prospects from a defensive standpoint. He has shot up some of their boards from being a later first round pick to a little bit of a higher first round draft pick because of how much you can move him around. He's an IQ, and also he's a very physical corner, isn't afraid to press, and he has some elite ball skills which propelled him to have those 5 interceptions this past season in 2024. So while he isn't in my top 10, I think that he'll certainly, wherever he gets drafted to, make a really good impact and could end up being ultimately one of the best prospects in this draft when it's all said and done. This is the second to last honorable mention right here before you get into the top 10 list. Mike Green out of Marshall, 6'4", 248 pounds, nearly 250 pounds essentially. You can say 6'4", 250, edge rusher. I think whatever team he goes to, he'll have an instant impact from a pass rushing standpoint. Now, a huge question mark is going to be his ability to stop the run, and usually that rookie edge rushers in the NFL, it takes a little bit of time for them to adjust to. But if you look at the type of season that Mike Green had last year in 2024, it wouldn't shock me at all if a team drafted him in the top 15. He had 17 sacks. He had 5 games where he had multiple sacks in the game, including a game against Southern Miss where he had 3 sacks. And I know he played in the Sun Belt Conference in Marshall, but I think that type of skill set and his ability can translate with the right coaching and technique skills. It can go a long way. So I think that Mike Green, while he has a lot of questions in terms of off the field, I think that on the field he can be a very versatile pass rusher who can win at a high level throughout his career, and whoever he goes to, I think that he'll be able to impact their defense instantly. The last honorable mention on this list is wide receiver Matthew Golden out of the University of Texas, 6 foot 195 pounds. Of course, before being at the University of Texas, was at the University of Houston, my alma mater. Yes sir, go Cougs. And in this past season with UT, he showed how really elusive he is as a route runner, and even though he's only a 6 foot wide receiver, has a pretty good catch radius, and he's able to make contested catches. And at times when Quinn Ewers didn't throw the best balls, he was able to make Quinn look better with his elite ball skills. Had 58 receptions for 987 receiving yards, averaged 17 yards per reception, and had 9 touchdowns. He had a lot of signature touchdowns throughout the season where he was able to make big plays, and you saw that throughout the college football playoff. Really, he became Texas' best target over a player like an Isaiah Bond. I think Golden, he has really shot up a lot of teams' draft boards, and you can make the argument at that 12 position becomes very interesting, for example, with a team like the Dallas Cowboys, who are probably contemplating taking a wide receiver like a Matthew Golden or a Ted McMillan. Either way, I don't think they can go wrong. Matthew Golden ran a 4.29 40-yard dash at the draft combine. I think whatever team he goes to, he'll be a perfect Z receiver who can win on the outside one-on-one and be an instant weapon to an offense to make a quarterback's life easier. So coming in at number 10 on this list is offensive tackle Armin Mimbu from the University of Missouri. He could go as high as 7 to the Jets, or some people even have him mocked to the Patriots to be protection for a quarterback like Drake May. But before getting into his potential draft spot and things of that nature, let's talk about how dominant he was in 2024 and just overall throughout his career. In 2024, he had a Pro Football Focus rate of 90.4, which was third in the Power 4 for offensive tackles, and he played almost 900 snaps at 891 specifically. Was second team All SEC this past year. He also has 30 starts in his 3 seasons at Missouri, and really from an offensive tackle standpoint, he did line up sometimes at the left tackle, but mostly he was lined up at right tackle, which he played 94% of his snaps at. And when you look at his pass blocks in this season, he allowed only 1 sack in 391 pass block situations. So I think that he could be a tackle. Of course, it always is an adjustment period for these rookie offensive linemen, but sometimes it's different because you look at a player like a Joe Alt from last year who was drafted to the Los Angeles Chargers. He had an instant impact, and he was lined up against a player like a Max Crosby in his first game and held his ground at a high level. And I'm not saying Armand Membou is the same type of prospect as a Joe Alt, because I think that there aren't necessarily generational offensive linemen in this draft, but I think that there are certainly multi-year starters in this draft, maybe even 10-year starters, and Armand Membou definitely fits the mold of that, what he was able to do at Missouri. And if you look at example of his tape against Texas A&M, where he was lined up against a player like a Shamar Stewart, who almost made my honorable mentions on this list, but I still think that he's a little way off. But Shamar Stewart has really flew up a lot of people's draft boards, will certainly be a first-round pick. Armand Membou really had Shamar in jail, to be honest with you. Now, I know that Missouri lost that game by a good amount to Texas A&M, and obviously offensive linemen, they can't score touchdowns, things of that nature. They lead the way and stuff like that. But Brady Cook in that game, their quarterback from Missouri, went 13 for 31, so it certainly didn't help. But if you look at the film from that, Armand Membou, he held his own against Shamar Stewart and a Nick Sorton, who's going to be probably drafted around the 2nd round or something like that. He held his own. So if you get Armand Membou in the right situation with the right offensive line coach in the right schemes, he can not only be a good pass blocker, but also he can hold his own in the running game as well too, and can be a starter for a team for years to come. So it just really depends. Now, I'm not gonna lie, for his sake, I wouldn't hope for a Jet situation, but you never know. Aaron Glenn, he's building a really good situation and culture there. But my thing with offensive linemen, sometimes when some people label them as busts or things of that nature, is also the coaching. It matters. A lot of people underrate the coaching aspect in the NFL, but particularly from an offensive line standpoint, your technique and how you're being coached, it really matters, because you can get beat off the top easily by an edge rusher. The discipline and technique and things of that nature also play a role together in terms of not being called for penalties, your situational awareness and things of that nature. So I think Armand Membou, he will certainly have a really good impact to whatever team that he goes to. The coaching is just definitely going to matter, but he'll be able to win because I think that he is a disciplined offensive lineman, and I think that he is a top 10 prospect in this year's 2025 NFL draft. Now, in my opinion, Will Johnson, he might be a top 5 player in this draft when it's all said and done. This is a player who I think the draft evaluation has really gotten crazy, because I think that besides Travis Hunter, I think he's easily the best cornerback in the draft. Will Johnson literally won defensive MVP in that college football championship game against Washington in 2024. I talked about Jahdae Barron having a high football IQ at the cornerback position. Will Johnson is the epitome of that. He literally baits quarterbacks into thinking that they can test him, and it resulted even earlier this season. I know he missed the rest of the year early because he had a turf toe injury, but he had 2 pick-6 touchdowns from doing that. In 2023, he had 4 interceptions, and in his freshman year, he had 3 interceptions. He's shown throughout his college career that he has a knack for throwing quarterbacks off and putting him into treacherous situations, and at the next level, I think that Will Johnson is going to make a name for himself early, to why teams shouldn't try him. And I say that he's being over evaluated in my opinion, because I've seen some mock drafts have him going to the Miami Dolphins at 13. In my opinion, he should be a top 10 to 11 pick, because I know he was injured, and of course the injury concerns are going to be a question mark, but what he does at his 6'2", 200-pound frame, it shows that he has the potential to be an elite corner at the next level. I mentioned he won that defensive MVP in that game against Washington in the national championship in 2024. He also was lined up against Rome Odunze, who was a 9th pick in last year's draft, and literally Rome Odunze was very limited. He wasn't able to get really any separation against Will Johnson. Will Johnson, you can make the argument he had him in jail. But along with that, in his last 2 seasons, he did not allow a touchdown in 479 snaps, and in his career had those 9 interceptions, the most in the Big Ten throughout that span from 2022 to 2024. He didn't play a lot last season, but if anything, if you want to evaluate Will Johnson as a prospect, look at his 2023 tape, because he went crazy and he was a huge factor to why Michigan won a national championship, why they were as successful as they were that season. So he is just a player who I think is from day one going to show why he should have been a top 5 pick, to be honest. And it's funny because I don't know if y'all watch Vosh Lombardi, one of the best draft breakdown content creators on YouTube, but like he says, teams suck at drafting. And honestly, I can make the argument that Will Johnson should be higher than this. Right now, the only reason why I have him this low is because of some of the injury stuff, because he also had a hamstring injury that prevented him from participating in Michigan's pro day. But I think that he's going to be a player that really thrives at the next level, and whatever team gets him is going to get an elite corner for their future. So we have Will Johnson coming in at number 9. Coming in at number 8, we have another Will, but his name is Will Campbell, offensive tackle from LSU. And the reason why I have him over Armand Membou is because of his body of work. From his freshman year in 2022, he showed that he has the potential to be a really great offensive lineman. Was freshman All-SEC and freshman All-America. And then literally that body of work just continued into his sophomore and junior years. He only allowed 2 sacks and 989 pass blocks over the last 2 seasons and had a total of over 2,400 snaps at LSU at left tackle, and left tackle, in my opinion, besides as a cornerback on defense. Obviously quarterback is hard to play, but you can make the argument that left tackle is one of the hardest positions to play in sports as well too, because you're on an island all the time, many times against teams' best edge rushers. And for Will Campbell, I think wherever he gets drafted to, like I mentioned about Armand Membou, I think likely Will Campbell could get drafted to the New England Patriots. He could be a type of player with the proper coaching and technique, like I mentioned with Armand Membou, because that coaching matters, especially with technique. At the offensive line position at the next level, he could be an all-pro certainly. And I know a lot of the conversation has well been something about his arm length and stuff like that. I think that is so overrated. Obviously that is a factor to an extent, but when you only allow 5 sacks in total in your 3-year college career, and most of them came in his freshman season, I think that with the right O-line coaching development, that he's gonna be able to be an offensive lineman you win because of. And he's played with a lot of great players. He played with Brian Thomas Jr. in 2023, same with Malik Neighbors, and obviously Kyron Lacy, God rest his soul, played with Jaden Daniels at the quarterback position in 2023, and had to adjust to a quarterback in 2024 and Garrett Nussmeier. 2 different types of quarterbacks, but he showed that regardless that he's going to be a guy that does his job and wins in the trenches. So I think that Will Campbell, I think that he's certainly going to be a really good offensive lineman, very decorated. You just look at his accolade log, it's longer than a grocery store receipt list. 2024 consensus All-America, first team All-American, first team All-SEC. I mean, really the list just goes on. So I think that Will Campbell, he's a really good offensive line prospect. I mentioned also Armand Membou against Texas A&M, and I keep mentioning Texas A&M because they're reviewed as one of the best defenses in the SEC, and they almost had a chance at making the college football playoff, but obviously they didn't. But Will Campbell, he was matched up with a player like Nick Sorten as well, and he really had him in check as well too. So I think Will Campbell, he's going to thrive at whatever team that he goes to, and he's going to be a foundational piece at the offensive line position and be a great left tackle in the future. So Will Campbell finishes at number 8 on this list. Coming in at number 7, we have Miami quarterback Cam Ward, who I think we can all agree is going to end up being the number 1 overall pick, but also he is the only quarterback that I have on this top 10 list because, like I mentioned in an intro, this is not the strongest quarterback class, but Cam Ward, I think he has an opportunity to really be great. Obviously, him likely going to the Titans, it's going to be a tough situation there, but he will have some weapons. But before going on to that situation and talking about what he'll be in the future, let's talk about what he did at Miami, but not only Miami, Washington State, and Incarnate Word. And that's a thing that bodes well for him. Yes, he played at 3 different schools, but now, as you've seen with these quarterbacks in the NFL, as recent as last season, a player like Jaden Daniels, who had the greatest rookie quarterback season of all time, he had experience playing at Arizona State, then playing at LSU, and then also a player like Bo Nix, who played 5 to 6 years in college. He had a really great quarterback season as well too, and led the Broncos to the playoffs. So I think with those type of traits, Cam Ward is going to be able to impact wherever he goes, but likely to Tennessee at a high level. And as we saw with this season, he threw for over 4,300 passing yards, which was second last year, and he had 39 passing touchdowns, which ranked first. Only having 7 interceptions, so that's a really good touchdown to interception ratio. Had a quarterback rating of nearly 89, which was second in FBS. Also threw for 158 passing touchdowns too in his career, the most in D1 history. That says a lot about Cam Ward. And I think that one thing that's really underrated about his game is his athleticism. Not necessarily in terms of he's going to be a prototypical dual threat quarterback who's going to be able to do a lot of RPOs, break for 70, 60 yard rushing touchdowns or 70, 60 yard big runs and plays like that. But he can scramble when he needs to, and he extends plays in terms of running out of the pocket, buying his receivers time to make some tight window throws. And he throws a really good ball that sails but hits his target right where it needs to. And if you look at his stats from Incarnate Word, particularly in the 2021 season, he went crazy. Now I know that's against lower level competition and things of that nature, but even then that showed why he was able to go into Washington State and had the good 2 seasons that he had there before coming to Miami, where he had a near Heisman winning season where he finished 3rd in Heisman voting. But in 2021 he had 47 touchdowns and only 10 interceptions and had over 4,600 passing yards that year. And then he transferred to Washington, had 23 touchdowns and 9 interceptions and 25 and 7 before, like I mentioned, going to Miami in 2024. So he has a lot of experience, and like I said, that bodes well in comparison to the quarterbacks who have had recent success in these past couple of years to impact their rosters. When you look at a lot of these quarterbacks who haven't panned out or who still haven't hit expectations, for example, like an Anthony Richardson or quarterbacks of that nature, they didn't play a lot of football. Cam Ward, he played a lot of college football, and him being a 0-star recruit to being at the level that he is now, on track to being a number 1 pick, that's really a great story in itself. So I think he really warrants being at the number 7 position on this list of a top 10 draft prospects, and I think that he's going to really thrive in the NFL. And I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years if he's a top 12 to 10 quarterback in this league, because of the type of mental makeup that he has and the toughness that he has at the quarterback position too, and mentality that he has. So I talked about with Will Johnson, this whole draft process being an overthinking type of thing and why teams suck at drafting at times. This player right here is the definition of that. Tetairoa McMillan. Yes, he is number 6 on my board, and a lot of people might fight me on that. We can fight on it because I think that he is an outstanding wide receiver prospect. Obviously, Travis Hunter, he's a wide receiver in DB, so I guess he ranks number 1 in terms of a wide receiver standpoint. Tet McMillan, I think like pure wide receiver being at the position, he's the best in this draft. People are overthinking the separation skills, things of that nature. Dude, if you watch his film, if you watch the type of X receiver that he will be at the next level, it's not even a question in terms of his catch radius, the ability just to go up and get a 50-50 ball. He's going to be really good at the next level. And I think a player that you can compare him to is a Michael Thomas potentially. A lot of people like comparing him to a Drake London or a Mike Evans. I think Mike Evans would be a little bit better of a comparison than Drake London, but being a 6'5", 212 wide receiver, I think Tet McMillan, he'll thrive instantly to whatever situation he goes to. And for example, if you look at him going to the Dallas Cowboys, he would be the number 2 receiver. He would make things easier for a player like a Dak Prescott and a CeeDee Lamb, who would free up a lot of situations for him, but then that would make defenders honest. That has nothing to do with the team that he goes to. In terms from a pure prospect profile, Tet wins. Even from his freshman year, he had 700 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. But if you look at the past 2 seasons, 2023, he had over 1,400 receiving yards, had 10 touchdowns on 90 receptions, and then last season had over 1,300 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns on 84 receptions. So I just think that he's shown through his body of work that he wins and he's consistent at a high level. I think he also has underrated yak ability. In 2024, he had 430 yards after the catch, and in his collegiate career, he averaged around 500 yards after the catch. And also coupled with that, last season, he ranked 3rd in FBS receiving yards, and that wasn't even his best season in terms of a yard standpoint. But if you look at his whole collegiate career, he had 3,423 receiving yards and 145 receptions. And he had 33 receptions on passes that went 20 plus air yards, which was the most in the FBS the last 3 years. So I just think that he's a prospect that has been so polarizing, but for no reason. And there's recently been the clip, I believe, that went around talking about him not watching tape or something like that. That was from his freshman year, obviously playing in the NFL, and the last couple of years, I know that his mentality has changed, and teams have probably asked him about that. Whatever team he goes to, especially if he's picked outside the top 10, he will be arguably the biggest steal from this draft, because like I said, this has just been a thing of teams getting tired in their evaluation, being scared, I guess, of the separation things of that nature. But his volleyball background, his ability, and his overall catch radius, like I mentioned, I think that makes him the best receiver in this draft, not named Travis Hunter, and he ranks number 6, justifiably so in my opinion. If you don't agree, let's talk about it in the comments down below. Some people think that Matthew Golden is better than him. I put Matthew Golden as my honorable mention. I do not think Golden is better than Tet McMillan. That's just a fact in my opinion. And he didn't even have the best quarterback play at Arizona. He was still able to make his quarterback look good, similarly to Matthew Golden did with Quinn Ewers, but even amplified in my opinion in Tet McMillan, because he did that throughout his whole collegiate career. And he could have left last season and transferred to a bigger powerhouse, but he stayed at Arizona, still was able to get his. And I know it was against a lesser team, but in 2024, he literally had a game with 304 receiving yards on 10 receptions. Against New Mexico, I know, but 304 receiving yards in any game is ridiculous. He also had a game with 202 receiving yards against West Virginia too in the Big 12. So we can talk about that. His body of work is immaculate, guys, and I think that he justifiably should be number 6, ranked as a top 10 prospect for sure in the top 10. I think that he's going to end up being the biggest steal outside of the draft, especially if he's picked outside the top 10. If he's picked inside the top 10, okay, we're good. But if he's picked outside of the top 10, whatever team drafts Tet McMillan, their receiving room gets upgraded instantly. So now we're in the top 5, and we have a teammate of Will Johnson, Mason Graham, defensive tackle, 6'3", 320 pounds. Best defensive tackle in the draft in my opinion, and like I said earlier in the video, arguably the best defensive prospect in the draft, even though I think he ranks 2nd to someone else, so I think it's pretty obvious. But Mason Graham, man, what he's done throughout his college career, I think he justifiably should be a top 5 pick, and if the Jacksonville Jaguars have any common sense, they'll draft him, but we know that oftentimes they don't, so we'll see. And they have Liam Cohen as head coach too, so he could be trying to draft an offensive weapon. But Mason Graham, though, he is a guy who we saw thrive in 2023, like I said, with Will Johnson. If you look at the game in the Rose Bowl, he was a defensive MVP where he had 4 tackles and a TFL, which prompted him to win defensive MVP for that game. But if you look at his film, his pursuit is amazing. Despite being 320 pounds, he's an athlete that still seems like he has endless energy at that frame. Runs a 5.02 40-yard dash at that frame as well. It's just crazy the type of gifted athletes that we have nowadays. Mason Graham is the epitome of that. Had 3.5 sacks this year, 24 solo tackles in his 2024 season, and in 2023 he had 35 tackles total and a forced fumble, 23 solo and 12 assisted tackles. Was a 2024 unanimous All-American, and we all know the rivalry against Michigan and Ohio State. In that game where Michigan upset Ohio State this past season, even though Ohio State won a national championship, Michigan got the best of them, and in that game, Mason Graham had a season high 8 tackles in that matchup. It's really a game record, and he ensues chaos against opposing offensive linemen. Your quarterback only has so much time when facing Mason Graham, can only get through his progression so quickly before Mason Graham is close to the back backfield, whether that's through the middle or if you look at his tape as well, he uses a lot of spin moves, which can sometimes be dangerous and get him lost in the play, but he can attack the offensive line at will and get to the quarterback. And also he's pretty good in the running game as well too. And similarly to what I talked about with Armand Mimbu and Will Campbell in terms of them adjusting to technique and things of that nature from an offensive line standpoint, that bodes the same for a defensive tackle like Mason Graham at the next level as well too, just from a technique standpoint and just with some coaching from a defensive line coach. But I think Mason Graham, wherever he goes to, is going to be able to have a great impact and be a very physical defensive lineman. Being a 3-tech defensive lineman, he's going to be able to disturb what the offense overall wants to do. And if he goes to a situation like the Jaguars, for example, they have a Trayvon Walker as well with him and a Josh Hines Allen as well too, which would make that a solid core of a defensive line. So wherever Mason Graham goes though, I think that he'll thrive ultimately, and he ranks top 5 for a reason, and he has a chance to be really dominant. So now a lot of people will say that there's only 3 blue chip players in this draft. I make an argument that there's 4, and number 4 on this list is Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State, 6'6", 260 pounds, insane frame. First and foremost, the season that he had last year is incredible. But before we get into his stats specifically, high school quarterback. I know a lot of y'all people who watch Penn State and watch his film saw that sometimes he would play wildcat quarterback and sometimes they would use him as a trick play option at that position as well too, and even give him direct snaps to scramble. Let's talk about his stats in his first 3 years. 2021, only 5 receptions for 61 yards and 1 touchdown. Okay. 2022, 10 receptions, 123 yards and 3 touchdowns. Saw some more production in 2023, 34 receptions, 422 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. That's solid as well right there. This past season, 104 receptions for 1,233 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. That basically tripled his production from 2023. And I think it's a lot of reasons why people have him being arguably the best pass catcher in this draft despite being a tight end. And I know a lot of people also mentioned Colston Loveland being the 2nd ranked tight end in this draft. He'll probably be a 1st round pick as well. I think that Tyler Warren is a better prospect in many areas, but first and foremost, before we get even to the pass catching aspect of his game, as a blocker, he is very physical, and I see why a lot of people in ways compare him to a Rob Gronkowski. He thrives and enjoys being physical and being in the trenches. You can use him as a pin and puller in a running game, and he thrives well in that aspect. A very physical tight end. If you look at some tape right here against Oregon, just pushing an Oregon defensive lineman outside of the frame, it just shows how he embraces the physicality of the game of football, and he's just a guy, and he's a guy that just loves physicality. A lot of people want to compare him or have compared him in ways to Brock Bowers in terms of the type of impact that he can have immediately to a team, and I can see that, but I think that he's just a totally different type of player in terms of not only being a prototypical type of tight end, but as a pass catching tight end, he just wins. His contested catch rate, kind of like I mentioned with a Ted McMillan, is like no other. He goes up and gets the ball. It doesn't matter if a defender is right there or even 2 defenders are there too. He still has the potential to climb Mount Everest and go get the football out of the air. That's why I really think that arguably he might be my favorite draft prospect in this draft, because he is just gonna be an instant weapon for whatever team he gets drafted to. It doesn't matter. I think that he can really fit with nearly any team in the NFL in terms of his type of skill set and what he provides. And we saw that in the college football playoff game against Notre Dame, where he had 6 receptions for 75 receiving yards. Just overall this year, put in great output. And if you look at the game against USC this past season, he thrived at a high level. You see the stats, obviously 17 receptions for 224 receiving yards in that game, and a touchdown, of course. I think Tyler Warren, wherever he goes, he's going to be a huge part of what they do. I think that you could see instantly like a type of Sam Laporta impact that he had with the Lions in 2023, type of instant impact, but maybe even to a higher level with Tyler Warren, because I think in many ways he's a guy that you draft to your fantasy team at tight end, and you can make the argument that he could win offensive rookie of the year too in many ways, depending on how the rest of this draft and how these rookies translate in year 1. Because Tyler Warren, I think that he's going to be a really great player in the NFL. I think that he's a blue chip player in this draft for sure, and I think that he justifiably so is number 4 for these top 10 NFL draft prospects being ranked. So at number 3, y'all already know who I'm about to talk about. Ashton freaking Jeanty, running back out of Boise State, finished 2nd in the Heisman race, but in my opinion, I think he should have won, but that's a conversation for another day because a lot of people will probably want to fight me on that. 374 carries for 2,600 rushing yards and 29 touchdowns. Had a sensational year. Even beyond those stats, he had 1,900 yards after contact as well, which was the most in FBS history. But even beyond that, if you look at Ashton Jeanty's skill set, his contact balance, he's slippery and elusive. He's a very powerful and tenacious running back and very physical running back too, embraces the physicality of the game wherever he goes. I don't know if y'all saw that letter that he had. He said that he's going to have a Saquon Barkley type of impact. I can certainly see that. He is a running back who just breaks for the home run plays at any given time. And it's crazy because if you look at his tape and his stats from 2023, he had a really good season then, 220 carries for over 1,300 rushing yards, but he essentially doubled that in 2024, and it was a sensational season. And one thing that's going to be interesting in this game that utilized as well too, that we didn't see utilized as much in 2024, but we saw utilized in 2023, is Ashton Jeanty's skill set as a receiver out of the backfield. See, this past season, he only had 23 receptions for 138 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. But in 2023, he had 43 receptions for 569 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns, having 19 total touchdowns in that season. So we've seen Ashton Jeanty thrive as not only as a runner, of course, but also as a pass catcher too. So I think whatever team he goes to, we'll need to unlock and utilize that game, because that'll add even further depth to him as a weapon on the team and make things very difficult for defenses to compensate for against him. Teams that I can see him going to, certainly the Raiders have been the heavy favorite. Obviously, beforehand in this draft process started, a lot of people had him going to the Cowboys, but it seems like that won't happen. And as a Cowboys fan, I am kind of sad about that, but I just want him to be great at the next level. I think that he really will be, and I think that we're seeing a new age with teams being focused on the running game now. Running backs are back being popular. We saw Saquon Barkley get that huge contract extension after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and I think Ashton Jeanty, he's going to be the next great running back in the NFL. And in a deep running back class, as I mentioned, he ranks the top of it. Of course, some teams think that they can probably get a running back later and draft at a different position now, but Ashton Jeanty is the definition of the exception, because I think that he's gonna have a great career. And despite only being 5'9", he plays like he's 6'2" and has a physical frame at that running back position. And I think that he's the 3rd best prospect in the draft. So coming down to my final 2 draft prospects on this top 10 list, at number 2 we have Abdul Carter. Might be controversial to some people, but talking about him as a prospect, I think that he has the potential to be generational, absolutely generational. Of course, one of the blue chip prospects in this draft. 6'3", 260 pounds, kind of similar to Micah Parsons. Of course, going to Penn State, wearing the sticks. If y'all don't know what the sticks means, obviously number 11 at Penn State, going from a linebacker to edge. He has the opportunity to be amazing at the next level. This past season in 2024 had 12 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 68 total tackles with 43 solo and 25 assisted. And if you watch his tape, he just wins immediately. Every single time he wins. He's very elusive. His pursuit is endless. He's going to force his way to the football, to the quarterback. He's going to force the quarterback to throw the ball away. You're going to see that a lot against opposing NFL quarterbacks when he starts off the gate. His rookie year, ran a 4.48 40, so he's very quick, and he's just been consistent throughout his whole collegiate career. Even as a freshman, he had nearly 7 sacks, having 6.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and if you look at his sophomore year, he had an interception as well too. So I think Abdul Carter, he has the potential to be great. And the reason why I don't have him at number 1 is not because he doesn't play 2 sides like a Travis Hunter. I just think that there could be a little transitional standpoint where it takes like a game or 2 or even 3 for him to immediately take off running, and he could have some run stop questions to an extent, and that's normal usually for an edge rusher, for a rookie to get adjusted to. But I think that Abdul Carter, he has a chance to be a perennial all-pro, has a fearless type of mentality, and wants to get to the quarterback and wreak havoc as a defender against opposing offenses, and he has the potential to be amazing. So he finishes at number 2. Coming in at number 1 for these top 10 NFL draft prospects, it's obvious. It's Travis Hunter, wide receiver / defensive back out of Colorado. And really the main intriguing question with him is going to be, where does he play more? Regardless, we know that he's going to play at a capacity of both sides. It's just going to be interesting to see the team that he goes to, which in my opinion, I think it'll end up being the Browns, but you never know. The draft is so unpredictable, and some teams could try to trade up if they offer a ransom to these top picking teams. But wherever he goes to, I think in my opinion, him playing most snaps at DB and then also having packages offensively for wide receiver is the best type of case scenario, because it's going to be hard for a wide receiver first to then go on a defensive end and be asked to cover the best opposing wide receiver for a few snaps. I think majoring in DB and then minoring in wide receiver is the best option. But regardless of the situation, I think that Travis Hunter at both positions can be generational. Of course, as he had 96 receptions for over 1,200 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns this past season, which obviously led and prompted him to winning a Heisman Trophy last year. But also defensively last season, had 4 interceptions, had a forced fumble, 35 total tackles. I know a concern with sometimes with these corners, if they love to tackle and things of that nature, if they're scared to tackle, but I think that Travis Hunter, at times he's shown a willingness to. Obviously, he might need to put on a little bit more muscle just to be adapted to the type of receivers that he goes against. It just depends on the matchups, but I think that Travis Hunter has elite ball skills offensively, which obviously translates well for him defensively to having a lot of different pass breakups, things of that nature, which we saw at a high level at Colorado. He had 16 pass breakups in his 2 years at Colorado, and in total accumulated 9 interceptions throughout his college career, if you include the season at Jackson State. So similarly to a Will Johnson, how he's able to bait quarterbacks into those tough window throws. And the conversation with Travis, unlike a Will Johnson, of course, because Travis plays both sides, is his durability and things like that. But it just seems like he has an endless motor, kind of similar to what I talked about with Abdul Carter on the defensive defensive end, but just overall from a standpoint of philosophy, Travis Hunter has an endless motor. He wants to always be on the field making an impact, and it shows that he just has an unmatched type of stamina and pursuit that allows him to win, whether it's him as a corner pressing at the top of his routes and being able to recover, or as a wide receiver, the type of route running that he has. I think he has a really good route tree as well. He has a type of potential to be a gold jacket type of a player if he thrives at the next level in the way that a lot of people think that he will. Just a really compelling conversation is for me with Travis is just like I mentioned though, it's just going to be very interesting to see what teams prioritize his main position being, but also how much they tolerate him playing the other position, because recently he said something about him not wanting to play, whether it's jokingly or unjokingly, which I think it was jokingly, because this dude loves football. Travis Hunter, he is a baller. That's why he's a unique prospect, why you have to let him thrive in his element. It's going to be a lot for him to learn, obviously, a defensive playbook and offensive scheme as well too, simultaneously at the same time. But if anyone can, I feel like it'll be him, because he eats, sleeps, and breathes football. So I think Travis Hunter, I think that he's the best prospect in this draft. Won the Heisman for a reason, won the Biletnikoff Award for a reason, Walter Camp Award for a reason, all these awards for a reason, and was one of the best prospects coming out of high school for a reason. And I just think now, him going to the NFL, we're going to see him thrive at a high level and be the definition of generational and special. And that's why I think he's the best prospect in this year's draft. So my final concluded list from 1 to 10 is wide receiver / defensive back Travis Hunter, edge rusher Abdul Carter at number 2, number 3 running back Ashton Jeanty, number 4 tight end Tyler Warren, number 5 defensive tackle Mason Graham, and number 6 wide receiver Teteroa McMillan, and number 7 quarterback Cam Ward, number 8 offensive tackle Will Campbell, number 9 cornerback Will Johnson, and finishing out the list at number 10 offensive tackle Armand Membu. Let me know what y'all guys think in the comments down below. Before I conclude the video, after the draft, like next week or something like that, or maybe even the week after, it just depends on how things are going, I'm gonna post the biggest takeaways from the NFL draft video, so stay tuned for that, because it'll be an intriguing conversation for sure, and it's gonna be interesting, like I said, to see how all these players will impact their respective rosters and the teams that they go to. So y'all stay tuned for that. But with that being said though, guys, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. We're getting closer and closer to 2,000 subscribers, growing the channel a lot recently. I appreciate all y'all new subscribers coming and all my people who have been watching me and my channel from the different phases that it has went through. Just a lot more content on the way, guys, as I continue to work to become a sports reporter covering the NBA and NFL in the future. I just appreciate y'all being here throughout the journey. We'll continue to post a lot of content. All glory to God throughout it all, and know that you have purpose. God has great things for you guys. Y'all be blessed. Know that Jesus loves you. You matter. You have a lot of great things that you will accomplish in your life. Y'all be blessed. I appreciate y'all. Y'all have a good one.